The first time I saw James Benson again, I thought I was seeing a ghost. It had been years since he had left Sarah. He was the man who had once been everything to her, the man who had been the love of her life, her fiancé, before he walked away to marry someone with more money. I had heard about him from Sarah in bits and pieces, but she never talked about him much. It was almost like she had buried him deep inside her, and I never pushed her to bring him up. After all, she had chosen me. We had a family. We built a life. We had a son. I thought we were happy, or at least I tried to convince myself we were. When Sarah died, everything I thought I knew about our life together came crashing down. Her sudden heart attack felt like a blow to the chest. The doctors said it was just one of those things, an undiagnosed condition that caught up with her. But even before the funeral was over, I felt like there was something I was missing. There was so much she hadn't told me. And that's when James Benson came back into the picture. It started with a letter. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, but when I saw the name, James Benson, I froze. He'd been gone from her life for so long. Why was he reaching out to me now? The letter was short, cryptic, and unsettling. It was postmarked from a small town, far away from where I had ever known Sarah or James to have any ties. It was as if the letter had come from a place far beyond their shared past. Dear John, it began. I know this is the last thing you expected to hear from me. But I owe Sarah and you an explanation. There are things that you need to know about her. Things that she never told you. I wanted to throw it away. I wanted to believe it was just a cruel joke, but I couldn't. My curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know what he meant by that. What was this secret he was holding? The letter continued. Before you make any judgments, please hear me out. I've been trying to find the right time to reach out, but after everything that happened, I realize now that the truth can't wait any longer. The rest of it was about his life after Sarah. His marriage, his children. He mentioned that he'd been looking into Sarah's life after her death and that there were things about her I didn't know. I read those words over and over. Things about her I didn't know. It hit me like a cold wave. What was he talking about? I didn't respond to the letter right away. I didn't know what to make of it. But after a few days of my thoughts spiraling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to hear what he had to say. So I called him. James agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. It was a quiet place, one where I had been going for years, long before Sarah passed away. The thought of meeting him there, of all places, felt wrong. But somehow I was compelled. When I walked in, James was already sitting by the window. His hair was a little grayer now, his face lined with age. But he still had the same arrogance in his posture, the same self-assured look that had always been so magnetic to Sarah. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened at the sight of him, the man who had torn her apart all those years ago. But I pushed the anger aside. I needed to know what he was here for. You came, he said, his voice thick with something that wasn't quite relief, but maybe satisfaction. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. I wasn't sure you would. I sat down across from him, trying not to let the weight of my emotions show. What is this about, James? I asked. You sent me a letter saying there's something I need to know about Sarah. What the hell is going on? He sighed, taking a slow sip of his coffee before looking back at me. I'm not proud of what I'm about to say, John. But Sarah wasn't who you thought she was. And she wasn't just your wife. She was someone else entirely. I felt a chill creep down my spine. What are you talking about? He leaned forward, his eyes serious now. Sarah had secrets, John. Things I didn't know until recently. And things you didn't know either. I was struggling to keep my composure. What kind of secrets? James hesitated for a moment. It was as though he was weighing how much to say, but finally he continued. She was involved with someone. Someone dangerous. I don't know all the details, but I think it's time you knew. It's why she died the way she did. His words hung in the air like smoke. I shook my head in disbelief. What? Sarah wasn't involved with anyone else. She couldn't have been. James met my gaze, his expression hardening. She was. There was a man named Robert Wilkes. A businessman. Sarah owed him money, a lot of money. And when she couldn't pay him back, things got ugly. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Robert Wilkes? My voice cracked and I stopped. This couldn't be real. My Sarah, the woman I had loved for years, couldn't have been involved with someone like that. You're telling me she was in debt to a man like that? And you didn't tell me this sooner? James looked uncomfortable. I didn't know the full extent of it. She tried to keep it from me too. But I knew enough. Sarah wasn't the person you thought she was. She was keeping secrets, and I think those secrets eventually cost her her life. My head was spinning. How? How did it cost her her life? James swallowed hard, his face a mix of guilt and anger. I don't know for sure, but I've been looking into it. Sarah didn't die the way you think she did, John. It wasn't just her heart. There were things going on that she kept from everyone. And I think that man, Robert Wilkes, might have had something to do with it. I didn't want to hear it, but I couldn't stop myself from listening. Each word felt like a stab. The idea that Sarah had been hiding this whole other life from me, that she had been involved with a man like Wilkes, made me feel like a fool. You're saying she was murdered? I asked, barely able to get the words out. I'm saying it's possible, James replied. She wasn't just in debt. She was in danger. And I think Wilkes was part of that danger. I sat there, the weight of his words sinking in. James was telling me things about Sarah that I never imagined. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could believe him. I didn't want to. Everything in me screamed to walk away, to ignore it all and try to move on. But I couldn't. I couldn't ignore the possibility that the woman I loved had been hiding something from me so deeply that it could have cost her life. A few days later, I received another call. This time it was from Robert Wilkes himself. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled, but there was an edge to it. Sarah didn't leave you everything, did she? He asked. There are things you don't know, John. Things that will change how you look at everything. I froze. Who is this? I demanded. You know who I am, the voice replied. And if you want to know the truth, you'll stop asking questions. But if you dig deeper, you'll wish you hadn't. The line went dead, and I was left with the sound of my own breath, quick and shallow. The truth, whatever it was out there. And I had no choice but to chase it, even if it meant I might not like what I found. It took me weeks to uncover the last piece of the puzzle. When I finally gained access to Sarah's will, I found something that shocked me more than anything James had told me. Sarah had left me nothing. Not a single thing. Not the house, not the savings. Instead, she had bequeathed everything to James with one condition. He was to keep a set of documents sealed until the day after my death. I didn't know what to think anymore. It was all too much. James had been part of her life again, keeping things from me, keeping things from everyone. The man who had left her, who had shattered her heart, was now the one who held all the answers. And now, as I sat there in the coffee shop, staring at James across the table, I realized I was faced with a choice. I could walk away and never look back. Or I could dive into the past that Sarah had kept hidden from me, knowing full well that it might tear apart everything I had left. We had been together for 19 years, Sarah and I. It felt like a lifetime, in the best way possible. When I look back at the early days, it feels like it was all a dream, the kind of love that people write about in novels or sing about in songs. We built a life from the ground up, slowly, steadily. We had a daughter, Megan, and from the moment she was born, everything seemed to fall into place. Our little family was perfect in its own way, uncomplicated and full of love. There were no big, dramatic moments. Just the quiet, everyday happiness of being with someone who truly understood you. For the longest time, everything was just as it should be. We laughed, we fought, we worked through the hard times, and we celebrated the good ones. Sarah and I were partners in everything. Parenting, finances, the house, everything. We rarely argued. Sure, we had disagreements, but nothing serious enough to make us question each other or what we had built. Megan's childhood passed in a blur of school events, birthdays, and lazy weekends. Sarah and I would sit on the porch after a long day, watching the sun dip below the horizon, holding hands, talking about anything and everything. The rhythm of our life became predictable, but in the best possible way. We were content. There was peace in that. But something changed as Megan got older. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle, like a shift in the wind you can't quite place, but you know something is different. The first sign was when Megan started applying to colleges. I remember the day she got her acceptance letter from her top choice school. It was a day of mixed emotions, pride, joy, and an undercurrent of sadness. Our daughter was leaving. It felt like the end of an era, though I didn't realize how much it would affect Sarah and me at the time. As the months went by, it was hard not to notice the distance between Sarah and me growing. Not in the obvious ways, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. We spent less time talking at night, less time on the couch together. She started spending more time alone, retreating into herself. I could feel her slipping away, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Was it the idea of Megan leaving? The thought that our little family was about to be scattered? Or was it something else? It wasn't just Sarah. I felt it too. There was a sense of finality in the air, a quiet tension that neither of us knew how to address. I knew the day would come when Megan would leave, but I didn't realize how much it would change things between Sarah and me. We had always been a team, and suddenly it felt like we were two individuals again, each with our own lives and our own routines. The empty nest was becoming more than just an idea. It was real. I tried to talk to Sarah about it once, but it didn't go well. I mentioned how different things felt lately, how I missed the connection we once had. She just brushed it off, told me I was overthinking it. She said everything would be fine once Megan was settled into college. But I wasn't sure that was true. It felt like we were waiting for something to happen, like a storm on the horizon that you can't quite see, but you know is coming. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if it was just Megan's departure that was causing the rift between us. Maybe it was that, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was simply the passage of time, the years catching up with us in a way that we hadn't expected. It wasn't that I didn't love Sarah anymore. I did deeply. But the intimacy, the closeness, had started to slip through my fingers. It felt like we were two people sharing a life, but not really sharing it anymore. I could see it in the way Sarah became more distant, more absorbed in her own thoughts. She stopped talking to me the way she used to. Conversations felt like obligations rather than the easy exchanges they once were. There was a sadness in her eyes that I couldn't reach, no matter how hard I tried. And I felt it too. My life had become a collection of routines. Work, the house, Megan's impending graduation, these things took up my focus. But underneath it all, I couldn't help but feel a quiet emptiness in my chest. Sarah wasn't the same person she had been. And neither was I. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened. It wasn't one big thing, but 1,000 small things. We had become strangers in our own home, sharing space but not really being together. I didn't know how to fix it, how to get back to what we once had. I didn't know if it was even possible. Megan's graduation was the tipping point. When the day arrived, it felt like everything we had been holding in came spilling out. We stood there, proud and emotional, watching our daughter walk across the stage, accepting her diploma. I could see the excitement in her eyes, but there was something else too, an apprehension, a quiet understanding that things were never going to be the same again. After the ceremony, we went out to lunch as a family. It should have been a joyful day, but the cracks in our relationship were impossible to ignore. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I barely spoke. She was wrapped up in making plans for Megan's move to college, and I was busy with work and trying to fill the silence in our home. We were both living parallel lives, coming together only for the necessities of daily living. I tried to reach out, to talk to her about how I was feeling, but every time I tried, she shut me down. She was too busy, too overwhelmed with everything that was happening. One night, I finally broke down. We were sitting at the dinner table eating in silence when I looked at her and asked, "Do you still love me, Sarah?" She didn't look up. She just pushed her food around on her plate. "Of course I do," she said, but the words didn't sound convincing. They felt like something she was saying because it was what she was supposed to say. "I don't think you do," I said. "I don't think either of us knows what's happening anymore." She finally looked at me then, her eyes tired, her face drawn. "John, I'm not sure I know either. I'm just tired. Tired of pretending that everything is fine when it's not." The words hung in the air between us. There was no anger in her voice, just exhaustion, a kind of weariness that I had never heard from her before. It wasn't just about Megan leaving anymore. It was about us, about what we had become and what we had lost along the way. I didn't know what to say after that. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I didn't know how. The truth was, I felt just as lost as she did. We had both been holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. The life we had built, the love we had shared, it all felt so distant now, like a memory of something that had once been real but was fading away. That night I lay in bed next to her, my back turned to hers. I could feel the space between us, the distance that had grown over time. And I wondered if we could ever find our way back to each other. Or if, after 19 years, we had already grown too far apart to fix what had once seemed so perfect. Megan was leaving soon. That much was certain. But what about Sarah and me? Would we make it through this transition? Or was this the end of our story, the final chapter of a life that had once felt so full of promise? I didn't have the answers, and neither did Sarah. All we could do was wait and see. But I couldn't help but feel that we were both holding our breath, waiting for something to change. Only neither of us knew. It had been weeks since Megan left for college, and I thought that, in some strange way, things between Sarah and I might improve. We were both adjusting to the emptiness that filled the house, trying to find our footing again. But instead of getting better, it felt like we were drifting further apart. The gap between us was widening with every passing day, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bridge it. I knew Sarah was still distant, but I told myself it was the change in routine, the empty nest, the fact that Megan wasn't around. I tried to be patient, to give her space. But when I started noticing things that didn't add up, I realized that something else was going on. It started subtly, just little things at first. Sarah was spending more and more time on her phone, staring at the screen for long periods of time when I was in the room. She'd leave the house more often, sometimes without telling me where she was going. When I asked her, she'd always give a vague answer, just out to grab some air, or, I needed to clear my head. It wasn't unusual for her to have moments of solitude, but the frequency of these disappearances was starting to get my attention. I decided to let it go for a while. I didn't want to seem like I was intruding on her space. But the longer it went on, the more it started eating at me. And then one night, I found something that confirmed my suspicions, something I wish I hadn't seen. I had come home from work early, for once, hoping to catch Sarah in a rare moment of quiet. I found her phone on the kitchen counter, face up. I didn't mean to snoop, but something about the way it was lying there, unattended, nagged at me. I picked it up, intending to just move it to the side, but then I saw the message alert flash across the screen. It was a text from James. The name alone made my stomach tighten. James Benson. Of course. I had been suspicious of him from the moment he'd reappeared in our lives, but I never expected Sarah to let it go this far. She had always told me that her past with him was over, that he was just a memory, someone who was long gone from her life. Yet here he was, messaging her after all these years. The text was simple enough, just a casual question about meeting up, but it was the tone of it that hit me. I miss seeing you. I think we should talk. It felt intimate, like they were picking up right where they had left off. I knew it was wrong to read through the rest of their conversation, but I couldn't stop myself. I scrolled back through the messages, my heart racing with every word. There was a pattern. They had been in constant contact for the past few weeks, exchanging messages almost daily. What started as friendly check-ins and updates had quickly escalated to more personal, more flirtatious exchanges. There were inside jokes, shared memories, even a few emojis that made it clear this wasn't just friendly communication. It was something more. And then I saw it. A message from James that read, "I know you've been through a lot, but I think we should talk about us. What happened between us was never finished, Sarah. I've never stopped thinking about you." It hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe for a second. The words were clear. He wasn't just reaching out for a casual conversation. He wasn't just trying to rekindle some old friendship. He wanted more. James was back in her life, and he wasn't just looking for communication. He was looking to resume their relationship. I felt sick to my stomach. It was as if everything I had known about Sarah, everything we had built, was slipping through my fingers. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? How could she have kept this from me for so long? How could she even entertain the idea of him, after everything? I set the phone down, my hands shaking. I had to process this, but I couldn't think straight. All I could hear was the thudding of my heart in my ears. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to confront her. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just a few innocent exchanges. This was betrayal. When Sarah came home later that evening, I was already waiting for her. She looked surprised to see me sitting in the living room, but it wasn't the kind of surprise that made her nervous. She didn't seem worried at all. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice. Or maybe, deep down, she knew I would eventually find out. I didn't waste any time. "Sarah," I said, my voice colder than I intended, "we need to talk." She paused in the doorway, her eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone neutral, almost too neutral. I didn't give her a chance to dance around it. I stood up and pulled her phone from my pocket, holding it out in front of her. "Who is James? And why are you still talking to him like this?" Her face drained of color as she saw the phone in my hand. For a split second, I thought she might try to deny it, but she didn't. She just stood there, silent, her eyes avoiding mine. I could feel the tension rising in the room, thick and suffocating. "John," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. It just..." She stopped, searching for the right words. "But there was no explanation that could make this okay. It's just, we've been talking and I thought maybe it was time for us to reconnect." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Reconnect? After all these years? "You've been hiding this from me, Sarah. You've been texting him behind my back, making plans to see him. And you didn't think I'd notice?" She sighed, a deep, defeated sound that made me feel like I was sinking into the ground. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "But I couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. I've been feeling so lost lately, John. I didn't know how to tell you. When James reached out, it felt like a way to reconnect with a part of myself I'd lost." I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. A part of herself? Was that all this was? A nostalgia trip to a time when she and James had been happy? It was more than that. It had to be more than that. "You don't get it, do you?" I snapped, my voice rising. "This isn't about some part of yourself you've lost, Sarah. This is about you and him, and the fact that you've been sneaking around behind my back." She looked at me, her eyes filled with shame. "I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. I never wanted to hurt you. But I've been thinking about this, and I think maybe it's time for me to be honest with myself. And with you." My stomach churned. "So what? You want to go back to him? Is that what this is about? You think you can just pick up where you left off with him?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were distant, as if she were somewhere else, somewhere deep inside her own mind, sorting through the mess she had created. I could feel the air between us crackling with tension. "I don't know what I want anymore, John," she said finally. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I need to figure this out." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream, to make her see how much she was hurting me, but I couldn't. The weight of it all was too much. I had spent years trusting her, believing that we had built something strong. But now, standing there in front of her, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I wasn't sure who she was anymore. She was looking at me, waiting for some kind of reaction, some kind of decision. But I didn't have one. Not yet. I had to process this, had to figure out what to do with the mess she had made. It felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, and I had no idea where it would lead. I just stood there, silent, as she waited. The words Sarah spoke that night will stay with me forever, haunting me in ways I can't describe. After everything, after finding out about her secret conversations with James, after the betrayal that sliced through me like a blade, I thought I had heard it all. But I hadn't. I hadn't heard anything yet. She stood there in front of me, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something else, something I couldn't place. I had asked her what she wanted, where her head was, if this was something she was going to continue. And that was when she said it. "I think I need time with both of you," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I still love James, John. Always have. But I love you too. I don't want to choose. I don't think I can." I froze. The world around me seemed to stop, the words sinking in slowly, one by one, like sharp stones hitting the bottom of a still lake. The air between us felt heavy, thick with the weight of her confession. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying, but I couldn't. It was too much. Want to divide your time between us? I asked, almost choking on the words. You want to have both of us? After everything? She nodded, the tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know how this happened. I don't know why it happened, but I can't let go of him, John. I can't erase him from my life. And I don't want to lose you either. You're my family. We've built something together. I'm so torn. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. There had to be some misunderstanding. Some way this could be fixed. But the look in her eyes told me she was serious. She wasn't just saying this to hurt me. She wasn't saying this to provoke me. She was saying this because, in some twisted way, she believed it was possible. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to make her see how absurd this was. How could she stand there and tell me she loved me and loved James, and that somehow, she could be with both of us? I wanted to tell her she was out of her mind, that this wasn't a relationship, it was a disaster waiting to happen. But I couldn't find the words. Instead, I felt a cold emptiness spread inside me. I realized then that everything I had believed in, everything I had worked for with her, was an illusion. She had been living with one foot in the past, one foot in the present, and now she wanted to drag me into this mess. She wanted me to accept the fact that she couldn't choose between the man who had left her all those years ago and the man who had stayed. The man who had built a life with her, who had raised their daughter, who had trusted her. I took a step back, trying to process what she was asking me. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling away, and all I could do was stand there, helpless, watching it happen. How could you even ask that? I finally said, my voice quiet but filled with disbelief. How could you expect me to share you with him? After everything? After all these years? Sarah took a step forward, her hand outstretched, as if she was trying to reach me, to bridge the gap that had opened between us. I know this sounds crazy, John. I know it's not fair to you. But I'm being honest. I can't just shut off my feelings for him. I can't pretend like he doesn't matter. And what about me? I asked, the words bitter on my tongue. What about our life? Our family? Does that mean nothing to you? It's not that simple, she said, shaking her head. I never stopped caring about him, John. I never stopped loving him even after everything that happened. But I love you too. You're the man I've shared my life with. You're the father of our daughter. I don't want to lose that. I felt my chest tighten, my throat closing up. I couldn't breathe. My mind was a blur of confusion, anger, and hurt. The realization that the woman I had trusted, the woman I had loved for so long, was asking me to share her with another man, shattered something deep inside me. This is insane, I said, my voice shaking. I don't know who you are anymore. You're asking me to accept this, to live in some kind of arrangement where I'm supposed to just go along with it? You want me to be okay with you seeing him, with you still loving him? I know it's a lot to ask, she said, her voice breaking, but I'm not asking you to be okay with it. I'm just asking for time. I need to figure things out. I need to figure out where I stand with both of you. I looked at her, the woman I had spent nearly 2 decades with, the woman who had once been my everything. And for the first time, I realized that the person standing in front of me was not the woman I had married. She was someone else entirely. Someone who had a past that I couldn't compete with. Someone who couldn't let go of her first love, even after all these years. I can't do this, I said, my voice low but firm. I can't be part of this. I can't sit here and wait while you try to figure out what you want, while you divide your time between me and him. It's not fair to either of us. Her face crumpled as I said it, the tears she had been holding back spilling over. John, please? I'm done, I said, shaking my head. I can't be a part of this anymore, Sarah. I can't. I love you, but this isn't love. This is a mess. And I'm not going to stay here while you tear us both apart. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah didn't say anything more. She didn't try to stop me, didn't beg me to stay. She just stood there, her shoulders shaking, tears streaming down her face, as if she had known this was coming all along. Maybe, deep down, she knew she couldn't have both of us. Maybe she knew she had already made her choice, even if she wasn't ready to admit it to herself. I turned and walked toward the door, the weight of the decision heavy on my chest. It felt like I was walking away from my entire life, from everything I had ever known. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't live in a relationship that wasn't real, that wasn't built on trust or respect. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when Sarah had already made her choice. I left the house that night, the place where I had once felt safe, where I had once believed in the future we had planned. And as I stepped into the night, I didn't know where I was going or what the future would hold. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in a marriage that was already over. When Sarah told me she wanted to split her time between James and me, I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. It felt like a cruel joke, but her eyes told me she was serious. I could no longer pretend that I didn't see where this was heading. I turned to a lawyer the very next day and started the divorce process. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only one that made sense. Staying with Sarah after her betrayal would have been a lie, and I wasn't about to live a life like that. The divorce was finalized a month later. Sarah and James wasted no time. They got married almost immediately, which only deepened the pain. It was as if all those years together, everything we built, meant nothing to her. Megan, our daughter, refused to have any contact with her mother. She was furious, heartbroken, and I couldn't blame her. She saw the marriage to James as the ultimate betrayal, not just to me, but to our family. I tried my best to bridge the gap between them. I didn't want Megan to carry the bitterness forever, but every time I brought it up, she shut me down. "She made her choice, Dad," Megan would say. "Now I'm making mine." There was no moving her. I understood where she was coming from, but it didn't make it any easier. I wanted to protect Megan, to shield her from the pain I was feeling, but it was clear she had her own to process. Months passed. I was just starting to adjust to my new life when Sarah and James came to me with a proposal that left me stunned. Sarah wanted to resume a relationship with me, partially. She suggested a schedule where she would split her time between me and James. I couldn't believe the audacity of it. After everything she had done, she expected me to share her? My first instinct was to slam the door in their faces, but then an idea formed in my mind. If this was the game they wanted to play, I could play it better. I agreed, but not because I wanted her back. I agreed because I wanted to get back at James. The arrangement was bizarre from the start. Sarah would spend a few days a week with me, and the rest with James. It was awkward, painful, and confusing, but I made sure to take full advantage of it. I treated Sarah as if she was still my wife, rekindling old routines and creating moments that would make James jealous. It wasn't hard to see the cracks forming in their relationship. James hated the arrangement, even though he had agreed to it. Every time Sarah left their house to come to mine, his resentment grew. James's anger only fueled my determination. I made sure he saw how close Sarah and I were becoming again. I knew it would eat at him, and it did. Their arguments became more frequent, more intense. Sarah tried to keep the peace, but it was clear she was struggling. She had put herself in an impossible situation, trying to balance two lives, two men, and it was tearing her apart. Eventually, the inevitable happened. James had enough. He told Sarah he couldn't do it anymore and walked out on her. I could see the devastation in her eyes when she came to me, begging me to take her back. She said she had made a mistake, that she should have never let me go, that I was the one she truly loved. But by then, something inside me had shifted. I didn't feel the same way about her anymore. The love I once had for her was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I looked at her and said, "Sarah, you made your choice. You wanted both of us, and now you have neither. I'm fine with the arrangement we had. Partial weeks, no strings attached. That suits me just fine." Her face fell, her tears coming fast and heavy. "Please, John," she pleaded. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you. I always have." I shook my head. "It's too late, Sarah. You wanted freedom, and now you have it. Enjoy." Watching her walk away, broken and defeated, should have given me some satisfaction, but it didn't. It felt hollow, like winning a game I never wanted to play. But I knew I had made the right decision. I couldn't go back to her, not after everything she had put me through. I had to move forward, even if it meant doing it alone.